All right. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope that woke everyone up. My name is Jonas, and I'm CEO of Greenbyte. And I'll explain a little bit more about what we do in this presentation. But what I really want to focus on is what we look at as three frontiers in terms of data and renewables. And those three frontiers are open, smart, and autonomous. And that's the focus of my presentation today. So open is basically about exchanging data and exchanging data that can be trusted. And as Brian was saying, that trust is key to data. And also the integration piece of integrating many systems is also really key in order to get a kind of diverse value chain to work together and use the same data. Once you have the data, most of our customers want to become smart with this data, to use it in ways which creates true insight. And long term, I think most of us are really quite lazy and would prefer to have a system that does the work for us. And that's basically closing the loop from these insights into the actual control system itself. That's the agenda for today. And where do I point this? No? There we go. Okay. So we've all seen this graph before, and basically the future is going to look very different from where we are at today. Electricity is going to double, and all of the growth is going to be in wind and solar. It's pretty fascinating to think about this graph also from the perspective of the number of plants in the world. Today, there are a lot of plants, power plants generating electricity. Most of those plants are already solar, but in the future, it's going to be an enormous amount of plants, power plants that generate energy. And of course, managing such a distributed system is going to require a different way of management than from what we do today. And so we think about the consumer in the top left corner, who's really not going to care about moving from a centralized system to a decentralized system. They're going to want to consume energy in exactly the same way as we consume energy today. The problem, of course, is that electricity is only going to be generated when there is wind or when there is sun. And in order to manage that, we really believe that storage is going to play a huge role in the energy transition going forward, and that storage has only just gotten started. So when we look at our customers, we started with wind, and we got into solar, and now we are exploring storage. But from our customers' point of view, they are becoming kind of technology agnostic in what they invest in. They invest in wind, and solar, and storage, some in hydro. And what they want to do is they want to collect all of this data into one platform. That platform for all of our customers is Greenbyte, of course. We realized that this data from the sites is not really enough. Our customers want to combine this data with other sources like weather data, power forecasting, substation data, power pricing, maintenance records, etc. And that's kind of a big task to collect all of that data. And so that's really our core business, and then to visualize this and provide analytics on top of it. But there are a bunch of use cases that are highly specific, where there are experts in the world who are much better than us at creating those use cases. So what we're doing now is we're creating a marketplace on top of Greenbyte, where third-party developers can develop applications based on this data that we have collected. And our customers can then go ahead and buy those services from those service providers. I'll get into a little bit about what kind of services that is later. Now, in order to attract third parties into such a marketplace, we need scale. And we think that scale, what we're aiming for is 100 gigawatts of renewables installed in our platform. Today we're at 30 gigawatts and growing pretty rapidly. But really, in order for someone to dedicate any time to build an application, you have to see that there is a market, somebody who wants to buy it. So that's why it's really important for us to go out and to provide a very good product so that we can bring in new customers and then we can bring in new application providers who can build things on top of Greenbyte. So when we think about kind of the landscape of data and what our customers want to do with data, we think about this pyramid, and it starts from the bottom, which is to actually get data, to obtain this data from all of these different systems. So we have built more than 500 data adapters, which can collect data from the Vestas V90, OPC, from the Nordics, I think you were talking about before, from a bunch of different inverter manufacturers, power forecasting providers, and yeah, just a lot of different sources of data. And then to also be able to share this data through really well-documented APIs so that others can take part of it. Now, having that data is not really enough for our customers. They also need to trust the data. And I think in wind, we've gotten pretty far as an industry to be able to trust this data. But in solar, it's a complete mess in trusting data. The market is so fragmented and the data sources are infinite. So it's very hard to trust the data, to make any decisions on data which you can't trust. And in solar, that's a big problem. Now, having data that you can trust, most people then want to be able to visualize and combine this data in various ways. And I'd say that that is where we are as an industry in wind. We haven't really even gotten into deep analytics yet in wind. There are maybe some small use cases in which analytics are being run and decisions are being based on analytics, but I would say that given the amount of available data, we haven't even started. So that's kind of the open part of what we see. And then we have, on top of that, the smart, and that means getting into like advanced analytics for very tailored problems in which that may only apply to a subset of the assets that are installed in our platform. And then you get some sort of insight that something maybe is broken or something is about to break, but then it comes into what do I actually do with it? And that's where most people want a recommendation. What should I be doing? And that's fine. Then you get a recommendation. But as I was saying, we're also lazy. We want somebody else to do it, right? We want somebody to take action. Here, I think there is a big opportunity for to integrate companies in thinking as an owner. You may want to have action being taken in a much more transactional basis than what it is today in the wind industry. Today in the wind industry, there are very long-term contracts in which people do stuff on the owner's behalf. And I do think that that should, in the future, become more transactional as things become more standardized. And so then it's about controlling the asset. So maybe there is some insight and this means that the asset needs to be curtailed. This should be happening automatically through a software system. And ultimately, what most owners want to do is to trade. And now that trading is becoming increasingly intraday, decisions have to be made on a second basis. Humans aren't really set up for that. So we think that there is big possibility for a software system to actually integrate all of this data, to take action, to suggest actions or even make actions, and to actually do the trading. So kind of an integrated user experience for an owner of an asset. Okay, so if we just like zoom in on being open. From the perspective of combining data, this is kind of a view that most owners of renewables want to have. This view is very difficult to make in a world in which assets are highly heterogeneous and there are many, many different data sources. So just to start out, most most companies in renewables, they have a budget. They expect to produce a certain amount of megawatt hours in a given month. Sometimes they don't meet that budget. And that can be due to a lack of resource. So the budget is input based on some sort of pre-investment or some assessment that's done before an investment is made. The resource generally needs to come from sort of satellite data source, so that you know how good the wind was during a certain time, or you have a net mast on site, but some data source that is not usually coming from the SCADA system. And then you have the concept of potential energy. So how much could an asset actually have produced? And there are a lot of different ways of calculating potential energy. Some people use the nacelle anemometer, then they use the warranted power curve. Some people use reference turbines. There's a large difference in how this is done. And in solar, it becomes a little bit more tricky, because there you need to also include like module temperature, ambient temperature, tilt of the different trackers. So potential energy, it's kind of hard to calculate. And then we have the availability, which in wind, we've got pretty well figured out. Most of the big turbine manufacturers provide an availability contract, which is pretty clear. But most of that is actually quite figured out. I think what most people are struggling with is the performance. So the turbine is operating, but is it operating at the maximum performance? And if it's not operating at maximum performance, why is that? And then of course curtailment, a bigger problem in some areas than others. But being able to calculate curtailment from all of these different data sources is a little bit tricky. Some turbines can provide curtailment, some grid operators provide if it's a grid curtailment, then you have like bat curtailment and curtailment for a bunch of different reasons. And then you get to the actual energy that was produced. So this picture really provides quite a good insight for most owners. And ideally, what you also want to do is to be able to roll this up on a portfolio level, drill down on a specific region, on a specific turbine manufacturer. So it's quite a powerful view. If we look into our portfolio, in which we have 30 gigawatts installed, we estimate that about 4 terawatt hours of energy is lost on an annual basis. That's a lot of money. And if we look at worldwide, the total installed base of wind and solar, about 120 terawatt hours is lost. That's even more money. So figuring this out and taking action has potential for very, very high value. And if we look at open from maybe a perspective of actually sharing data, this is an example of one of our customers in Indonesia. They have a wind farm in Indonesia. They have a control room in Hong Kong. All of the data from the wind farm is collected into Greenbyte. And then they have a requirement on them from the TSO that they need to provide how much they're actually producing and will produce, so that the TSO can curtail them if there is too much electricity going onto the grid. So what they need to do is they need to provide a production forecast to the TSO. And in order to provide an accurate forecast, we source meteorological data from a third party, and they send us the forecast, and we send them the data from the site so that they can continuously update their forecast on an hourly basis to provide the most accurate forecast possible. That data is then sent, the power forecast, to the TSO. The TSO sends curtailment instructions to the control room. The control room goes into Greenbyte and sends commands into the wind farm. And this is done through, so it's like a lot of different parts of the world who are all communicating through data that's being exchanged between different systems. And here it's the Greenbyte API that's used to power this. And we take the perspective that we'd like to be not only open from a platform perspective, but also open in sharing. So like documentation is open so anyone can read and apply these, use this Greenbyte API. So that's an example of how data can be exchanged, and of course data can be exchanged in a bunch of different ways depending on who's involved in the transaction of data. Okay, so another thing with open that I talked about before was the marketplace. And so in the marketplace, the first things that we are providing are extra data sources. Like you can buy your production forecast, you can buy historical data to fill gaps in solar, and you can buy power prices through the marketplace. And then you can also buy performance analytics. You remember the picture for the waterfall chart that said performance. That can be quite tricky to identify. So we sell performance analytics services that are not sold through us, but sold through a third party that delivers those insights. And then, of course, our customers have assets in more than 40 different countries. So in some countries, there is really important regulation that they need to comply with. An example is, for example, in the UK, where you have the wind turbine safety rules that a lot of people, everyone in the UK cares about, but nobody in Germany cares about. So that's also an add-on that's sold to the marketplace that's highly tailored to a specific market. And we really hope that there will be more third parties that can develop these types of services, and we welcome any such initiatives. Okay, so taking one step deeper into smart. Here I'm showing a service that's called Predict, that's using a large amount of data in order to predict component faults. And here there are two different owners with a wind farm each and 2 turbines in each wind farm. And Predict is using historic data in order to predict failures of components into the future. And so each component, represented here by a square, so 16 components per turbine, is trained on historic data. How does this component behave during perfect operating conditions? And we then monitor how this component is behaving going forward, comparing that to perfect operating conditions. And that's done on a per turbine and even per component basis. And all of a sudden, we will identify that, now it's not performing according to perfect operating conditions. And then we look across the portfolio. So what has happened when we've seen such a anomaly before? What have other customers done? And here, in order to provide a recommendation, like a prescriptive analytics, we look across the portfolio to see what others have done. So we can learn from different failure modes. And basically what this does is that these predictions and recommendations are going to become better the more data is actually installed in the system. So that's one way of being smart about data. But going forward, there are a lot of different ways to be smart about data. Of course, other forms of anomaly detection. We think that power price forecasting is one of them. If we look at a market like the Netherlands, where we have a 30% market share of all the renewables, no one should know better than us what the electricity price is going to be a couple hours from now, since electricity is priced on the margin and wind and solar are providing the cheapest form of electricity. Revenue forecasting, intervention planning optimization. So when is it a good time to do an intervention? Benchmarking of availability in order to purchase O&M contracts from different providers. And even what is the winning operational strategy for a given site? Do we want to take a lot of risk, low risk? Do we want to have long-term contracts, short-term contracts, buy spare parts separately? These are things that can be done with a lot of data. We haven't started to do these, but this is going to happen. We're going to do it, or someone else is going to do it, and it's going to benefit the industry as a whole. Okay, so coming into autonomous. Now, this is super long-term into the future, and I know how annoying it can be to listen to someone talk about things that aren't real and haven't yet materialized, but just maybe 5, maybe 10 years from now, this is where I think it's going to go. I think that a owner is going to be able to go into some software system and say, I want to, on this site, I want to take high risk, or I want to take medium risk, and I want to take a low risk, and basically tell the software system to figure it out. So basically, power price is expected to be high 2 days from now. Electricity price is expected to be low. There's a health issue on turbine number 7. Get the supplier with the correct work permit to perform the oil change, and then go buy oil from someone who can send it and then fix all of the logistics and put it on site. A very transactional relationship where you don't need a long-term relationship with the supplier who does this. And so there, I think that there is room for playing into the gig economy, where you have a bunch of independent service providers who can have a specific work permit, a record of work, and that the owner can actually select who they want to work with on each transaction or each thing that they need to happen. And of course, closing the loop from recommendation to automated controls, so that we're not only picking up SCADA data from the SCADA system, but actually sending controls into the SCADA system to continuously optimize how the site is being run. And then selling electricity. And yeah, just basic sales of electricity, but also with the advent of batteries, arbitrage, demand response, frequency regulation, and these last 3, I think is going to be where all owners make money, because my personal opinion is that this is where the electricity price is going. And on that note, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Happy to take any questions.